Welcome to Shadow the Cast, a Marvel Champions podcast. I'm your friendly neighborhood web war fanatic.
Woo!
Woo!
Oh my goodness. We are back. I'm excited to have you on, Web Warrior.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm Villain Fury, that's Nelson, and we have a very
Oh yeah.
special episode. Yeah, we should introduce ourselves, right?
Yes. So the three of us, what are we going to be talking about today? Villain theory.
So today we're talking about difficult villains, and exactly what we mean by difficult villains, I think we're going to go into pretty shortly, but I'm pretty excited to talk about that, and I think it's fair to say, hopefully you agree, Web Warrior Fanatic, you are quite known for playing difficult villains. I've seen maybe 1 or 2 games of Venom Goblin on your channel.
Yeah, I play a lot of the difficult villains.
Yeah, so I just want to say for people as well, the podcast comes out on the third Monday of every month. But if there are delays, such as Age of Apocalypse not arriving in the UK, that kind of thing, or illness, it might just roll over to the next month or be a couple of weeks delayed. But otherwise, third Monday of every month.
Well, we do have a guest today. That is Web Warrior Fanatic. Let's get to know Web Warrior Fanatic a little bit before we dive into some of these challenging villains. Now, Web Warrior, I know because we've talked about this before, but can you tell everybody what's with your name? How did you come to be known as the Web Warrior Fanatic?
I'm a fanatic. I love Spider-Man and I love the Web Warriors. Originally, I actually had my name as just like Franklin on YouTube, and then I posted like a couple of videos, and then like I was thinking like of deck name because everyone has a really cool deck name for like decks. And I was like, what's
Yeah.
a really cool deck name? And then whenever I made the like a Peter Parker Spider-Man deck, I was like, I want to call it the Web Warrior Fanatic. And I was like, let's change my channel to that too. So if there's anyone that's watching this from like way before, they would have saw that it wasn't Web Warrior Fanatic. It was like just Franklin. So
And so Franklin is your alter ego at that point, I would assume.
yes,
Excellent.
yes.
Nice. So about how long ago was that? When did you make those first videos, and why start making videos?
I started actually, I'm almost in a year in playing. I started playing in July last year. And then I just like posted my first video like in August of like Spider-Man versus Green Goblin Musician Formula.
Nice.
And yeah, I mean me and my wife play a lot of I don't know you guys play or yeah, I know Nelson plays but like Catan,
Mhm.
Splendor, like a lot of those type of games. But we never got into like something like this. But those games are a little bit competitive. So we wanted something, or I wanted something a little bit more peaceful in the household. So I was like, and then shout outs to my friend Keegan and Kobe. They introduced me to Marvel Champions, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is like a friendly game. Like we'll both win or both lose. Like we don't have to worry about like yeah, any sort of competition.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I love cooperative games, and Marvel Champions just, well, I mean, we are here talking, doing a podcast on the game, so I think that's pretty relevant. Do you have, before we kind of transition a little bit more, we have some fan questions, but I want to know, do you have a favorite memory of playing Marvel Champions, or I guess like adjacent to Marvel Champions? Like, what makes this game so special for you?
Oh man, I would say well when my wife got me like Mad Time Shot, that was my second box. And immediately we like opened it and we played Thanos
Oof.
co-op. And then that was a lot of fun. She was playing Ghost Spider, I was playing Peter Parker. And I mean that was just a really fun, like nice moment that I enjoyed. For solo moments, so I originally got Miles to play Ronan. And I got Miles through like this website called like Crazy Jackalope because I
Okay. Yeah.
wasn't planning on getting any content. Like I was just like, I'll be good with Ghost Spider, Miles, and Peter. And like I feel like, we're just like playing like together. It's not gonna be like hardcore or anything, We're good. I'm not gonna get yeah, so I got the Galaxy's Most Wanted as my first box. I wanted to beat Ronin, so I play a lot of Miles. And then I saw like a video online of Death Cry Gaming. He's another like content creator, and then he beat Ronin with Iron Man. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was possible. So then I tried it with Peter Parker, and then like that first game where like I fought Ronin with Peter Parker, I was like, holy cow, like because you had to do all this like build out and all this stuff. And that was like a really fun moment too. Like I was just like, this game is like the coolest game, and the feeling that you get whenever you're fighting like someone's super difficult. Like it's stressful, but then at the end it's like super duper fun.
That's awesome. That's that's a really fun story.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like how that kind of the difficult villains like Ronan already tied into kind of that memory. So it's very fitting for this episode as well.
They're just more satisfying, I would say.
So I want to ask you a question that was sent in from David Jacobson, but I kind of want to corrupt and twist this question for my own purposes. But I will say to David, your question will be like normally answered throughout this episode. I have no doubts of that. So thank you for sending that in. So they say, I see you mostly play Ronan, Venom Goblin, or Magneto on Expert for a good challenge, but do you ever try using other mod sets to crank up the difficulty? If so, have you ever created a villain with the other mod sets that was actually more difficult than those 3 villains? And the way I want to corrupt this is something that happened when we had D20 as a guest. I laid down the challenge to Nelson and D20. Did they want to play a difficult villain? So I'm going to say this to you two now, and this is mainly on you, Web Warrior, no pressure. Do you want to fight in a free-player multiplayer game with us probably on Nelson's stream, a villain that has been made more difficult, very difficult, by changing up the mod sets?
Yeah, I would love to. That sounds super fun.
I saw this question in advance and I schemed something up. I don't.
Oh no!
Yeah. Do you guys want to?
Villain's not nice when he gives suggestions to play against. So I'm a little scared. What is it?
Yeah, I've ruined a lot of Nelson's games on stream, and he's like, "Give me a nice mod set," and I'm like, "Ah, yes, this is my time."
It's never bomb scare. It is never bomb scare. I just want to throw that out.
So I'm really actually glad that Web Warrior brought up Thanos in his story there, because I would like us to play Thanos with his 2 normal mod sets removed and replaced with 3 small, innocent mod sets called Super Strength, Flight, and Telepathy.
Oh, gross.
Oh man. Wait, all 3 attachments? Like,
oh yeah, and the
oh my
gauntlet.
goodness.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, that actually sounds like Thanos. I feel like he should have like overkill, like, on his text box. He should have the Thanos is super duper powerful. I think that's very thematic as well.
I'm thinking maybe the Infinity Stones are giving him those kind of powers and things. I'm sure they can do everything. And this will really be a showdown between Thanos and us, because those mod sets, and this is intentional, don't have any minions in them. So when the Space Stone comes up, it's an instant acceleration token.
Oh my goodness. Well, now I'm gonna have nightmares tonight. Thanks, villain.
You're welcome. My job here is done.
No, that sounds incredibly challenging and fun.
I think we can do it, but I've not tried it, so it's gonna be interesting. He's gonna have like 10 attack and overkill or something crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely like Ronan, like Venom Goblin level. Like I feel like that's a good, just giving Thanos all those buffs.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to that. Maybe a bit too much.
Nice.
So as we move on into the podcast, we had a lot of questions for this episode. You guys had a lot of questions about the villains and for Web Warrior Fanatic. And because we had quite a few almost adjacent or questions that lined up, I've kind of condensed and crunched a few questions together. So your question will probably be answered, but it might be sort of amalgamated into a bigger talking point is what I'm calling it. And our first big talking point I'm calling the challenge and fun of difficult villains. So some of these questions are from me. Some of them are from Rathamak, Cool Caleb, Gaito, and Dustin, among others. So thank you so much for sending those in. And Nelson, do you want to jump in with one of these?
I absolutely do. We have to start it out with, I think, the question that everyone's kind of expecting. Who, as the collective, do we consider to be the most difficult villains? And can we agree on a top 4? I'm gonna let Web Warrior start us out, because I think that they have a lot of experience in this realm. But who would you say maybe like your top 2? I think are pretty obvious, right?
Yeah. I feel like we probably all agree. I would have Ronan the Accuser and Venom Goblin as like the top 2 guys.
No way, that's so easy. Yeah.
I want to, and maybe this is a talking point for somewhere else in the podcast, but I feel like a villain that we don't talk about too much, and I do think that the difficulty is scaled pretty significantly for solo play, is Collector 1, where it's just like nobody ever plays Collector 1, but I think he is probably one of the most difficult villains in the game, but it's never talked about because everyone's just like, he's no fun to play. Like no one actually plays him. Now that difficulty does change a little bit when you add more players, but in solo play, it's so difficult to the point where no one plays him.
Yeah, Collector 1 is, I think I've said this before in a previous episode of the podcast, my least favorite villain because he wants to take all my toys away. Where are they going? Stop collecting them. You've got your own encounter deck. Yeah, I've not played it in solo in a long time because I don't typically play that scenario very much, and when I do, it's definitely not solo expert specifically is the real nightmare fuel one. I think that one's definitely very difficult. Maybe for solo, it's definitely in the conversation. But I'm curious to know what Web Warrior thinks. Do you think Collector 1 is in the top 4 most difficult, or do you have any different opinions?
Oh man, I think it's all just subjective at the end of the day.
Oh yeah.
I personally, I think that he can definitely have tough games. And it could also just be my experience. I personally don't find him to be actually that difficult, and I feel like, but I feel like I do have to change entirely the way that I play when I'm facing him. So for sure, yeah, like I remember, yeah. So I feel like all you gotta do, like whenever I play him, I just play my attack event whenever I draw it. So like I remember whenever I was first playing him with Spider-Man on Peter Parker, um, every single time I would draw a swing web kick, I would just play it. And then by the time that I played the third one, like he's dead. And it would be like 10-minute games. And I mean, I think that if you do it that specific way, he's not as difficult, but definitely if you're trying to build out like how I do against Ronan or something like that, he's like impossible to defeat, like for sure. So I feel like that there's a balance. I think that definitely some heroes make him like impossible. Like if you're playing like Black Widow, he's probably like harder than Ronan or like, so I think definitely there's some variance there. And I feel like more event heavy heroes like maybe Gamora. I haven't played her, but I've seen like a lot of people play her, and I feel like she might just like cruise through, but I'm not exactly sure because I haven't personally tried that matchup.
Yeah, I think Gamora does well there. I think you're right. I actually think quite a few kind of difficult villains in general, if you have quite a fast-paced playstyle, like a high-tempo kind of damage thing, especially also for some of them, if you include like stuns and things, you can kind of just power through them before their awfulness really spirals out of control. So I think Collector's definitely in that boat. I'm going to throw out the other two that I think are kind of in there, especially like in a general sense, so all player counts pretty much. And I'm going to throw out Magneto and Loki, some other end of the box villains into the mix.
Yeah, no, both of those are very challenging. I'm a little surprised with Loki. I guess I never really thought of Loki as one of the more challenging villains. And in my mind, he's associated with annoying, which means I don't play him as much, which may just mean that, that's why I don't think that he is one of the more challenging villains. But that's interesting. I didn't think that Loki would be in the discussion of the top 4, but looking back on it, I mean, like you have 60 health per player that you have to go through in expert mode. That's a lot of health. So yeah, because you have to beat him 3 times. He can be very frustrating. He does have the Infinity Stones. Yeah, no, that's he's
my
me.
my logic kind of is, yeah, he's got that big health pool. His side schemes are quite chunky, and there's just a lot of time for things to go wrong because he takes so long. You do have to deal with things. I think he'll kind of defeat you out of nowhere, maybe a little bit less than, let's say, Ronan or Magneto. Although he can still do a lot, especially if you decide to go trigger and the time stone just randomly comes up and he gets advanced and our time's going. Things can go a little bit wrong, but it's just the length of time and kind of attrition aspect, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have like the exact same like perspective as Nelson, because whenever I was like first thinking about like tough villains, I would always think it's like Ronan, Venom, Goblin, and Magneto, and then a lot of people like commented, they're like, "Where's Loki? Loki should be up there. Like, where's Loki?" And I was like, "What is Loki like one of the harder ones?" And I mean, I think I would agree too that he is definitely like up there, like definitely like the fourth one too. I don't know why like the first 2 times I played him, I didn't find him as difficult, and for the same reason that you guys are saying, I do think that he has like a higher like main scheme threat threshold, but then at the same time he can just switch to like his like scheme one where he has like 3 scheme and then like scheme right away. But yeah, I mean, I think that Loki, I saw this is actually one of the other questions too, but I think Loki in standard is like harder than Magneto on standard, because Loki on standard is like the exact same as Loki on expert, except it's just one less bit. So I was like, what the heck? Like yeah. So I think that might be why I feel like he might be a little bit easier on expert, because all the other villains like ramp up a little bit and he just adds like 20 more hit points, which is still bad. It's harder for rushing, but I think that usually when you get the first Loki down, like that game's gonna be a win. It's just that if we can't get built up against the first Loki, then it might take me down.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned how he's basically the same on standard. They don't give him a different villain cards or anything, which is pretty crazy to me. I think he's quite a high variance kind of scenario because if you get the non-Stalwart versions of Loki and just status the heck out of him, the Infinity Stone stops going off. It makes things a lot more manageable.
Speaking of high variance, one of the names that I want to throw out there is Nebula, especially in expert mode.
Okay.
Yeah, because I've played games of Nebula where I was like, okay, did I just play Marvel Champions? And then I've played games where I have gotten absolutely barrel rolled over just 3 rounds because everything surges. And so do you equate, I guess I don't think this is one of our questions, so it's a question I'm going to pose. How much weight do you give to high variance scenarios in terms of difficulty?
So me personally, I don't, I kind of like balance it out. So I just kind of like take the average. Nebula, like I feel like Nebula is similar to what you guys were talking about, the Collector one. I feel like they're similar in their variance in that but I think she's like a level above that in terms of like it could be games where I feel like in true solo on expert mode, like specifically, that it's impossible to win, like literally impossible. No matter if you're rushing or building, like if she like enters that surge stuff on like turn one and gets those like I don't if she gets like 5 attachments in like 2 turns, like there's no way to get them down fast enough because on expert mode and in solo you can only get rid of 1 attachment max per turn. So then she's building those attachments faster than you can get rid of them, and they're capping like damage you can take by 5. They're like retaliating, they're discarding cards from your hand, like all that stuff. So I think that if she gets that, I honestly don't think like there's any way for me to like try to beat her like with any type of deck. But then there is like a rare chance of that happen. Like that's never actually personally happened to me, like where it's like impossible, but it's gotten close like the longer that the game goes. But then like the variance of like, and I'm sure you guys have had this too, where you just like play her and it's like 8-minute games, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, like she's not that. And even on expert mode, it's like 8 minutes, and I'm like, man, she's kind of easy. So then I just take the balance of that. And I'm like, okay, she's like a middle ground villain, but I hate it because she can be like harder than Ronan. And it's not satisfying because I play games that she's easier than Rhino. So like I just don't feel any type of enjoyment in beating her either.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say I found her easier than Rhino personally, but I definitely agree with all the high variance stuff. It's when you set her up, I don't know if this is exclusive to expert because I basically just play expert, so I don't remember. But you discard at the start and you can get techniques, and if you have no techniques, it's fine. If everything's a technique, especially like I play quite a bit of multiplayer, and if there's like 4 or 5 techniques just before the game's even started, I'm like, what has happened here? Why has this happened to us? I don't deserve this.
Especially because the expert, when she activates, you only are getting rid of one of those.
That's something.
Yeah.
That's something really interesting. I did want to quickly mention. I actually played her in the semi-recent time span, at least, with Taunt, and I was able to taunt her to kind of rip off some more of her things before the next villain turn, which was quite useful.
Cool.
So might have even been with
That's
Peter
super
Parker. He's one of my favorite Taunt heroes. Yeah, so that was a little something, but yeah, I personally probably put her in my top 8 or something villains. But there are times where, like you say, you can just destroy her. Sometimes there's 3 turns with no surge. Sometimes there's 1 turn with like 6 surge. I'm like, okay.
She played more cards than I did. Like, wait a second. So we've kind of narrowed down to Ronan, Venom Goblin, some of the other names that we've thrown out, Nebula, we've thrown out Loki, we've thrown out Collector 1. Are there any others that I'm missing?
I want to put another one out there, and this is going to tie into kind of another question here. I'm going to throw out Ultron out there and say, how much do we factor in teching or building against specific scenarios in terms of difficulty? Because I feel like if you have a deck badly suited to Ultron, you are probably going to get flooded by drones if they come in sort of faster than you can take them out, and it's very inefficient to put like a big chunk of damage on a tiny drone. But on the other hand, if you build for him, he is basically a pushover, I'd say, these days.
So I've never actually teched personally against Ultron. Like I played games in multiplayer where like people in the group tech, and then just like you're saying, like it's a super too easy. Like if you have like someone with retaliate, or you have like a lot of ways to like just do some AoE damage. I find Ultron, I don't know. So I never teched against him, but what I like to do against him a lot is flipping down to Ultra Ego, and I think that's just kind of my play style. So I find that if you're playing Justice and you can under surveillance that first main scheme and then get flips there, I feel like that he's not as difficult. And yeah, and even if it pops to the second main scheme, like he doesn't have that much other threat adding stuff other than adding the initial threat every single turn or taking that drone minion, right? I think you can choose between adding 3 threats to the main scheme or a drone minion. And usually I think I just take the extra threat because he's usually not adding that much anyways. So I personally never teched against him. And I think that some heroes like again like Deadpool. I mean, Deadpool was like the roughest thing against Ultron because I mean I'm scared to use my regenerating degenerate because if I flip down the Augur, like I could just die in a thing. So I have to try to play the game without dying as Deadpool until you get rid of all those concussive blasts. So yeah, I mean he can definitely be like a counter for I think some heroes. But personally, I've never felt that. I think he's definitely like a top tier villain. I wouldn't say that he was up there with Magneto or Loki personally, but I could definitely see him being hard to counter.
Yeah, I would say he's like a step down from the bigger ones, but he's still quite challenging. And I actually think Under Surveillance is very good. If you can keep him on that first main scheme, I actually don't think he's too difficult at all. And he's actually a really interesting villain in that I think his third stage is easier than his second stage when played on Expert because he doesn't keep spewing out all those drones, which is pretty nice.
Yeah. And I think it's brings up an interesting question because I play a lot of Lord of the Rings, and Lord of the Rings, the game is how do we build a deck to beat this scenario, which is kind of antithesis to that of Marvel Champions, where it's like I built this cool deck, let's go beat up some villains. Where Ultron kind of shows, the history of where Marvel Champions came from and like from Lord of the Rings, because it feels very much like a scenario that deck A is going to do significantly better than deck B about how you build that out. And so I think that's interesting. And how do you weigh that in terms of difficulty? Because I think that there are some other villains that are like that, Collector 1 being an example, right? If you build for Collector 1, if you rush Collector 1, he's not that difficult. But if you're playing Nebula against Collector 1, I don't know what you do, right? And so I think I'm kind of curious to hear also what the listeners think and how they weigh scenarios that you can deck build against to make them easier. Do you consider that a harder scenario than normal, or do you consider that a easier scenario because you can in fact solve it from the player deck building side? Because I think I land on I think it makes it an easy scenario. I do a lot of deck building, and maybe that's just my bias coming in at that point. But I think that if you can deck build for a scenario, it makes it a little bit easier in my mind. Whereas like Ronan is just like, okay, well, here we go. You can obviously build decks that are going to be better against Ronan, but it's still going to be very challenging. There's not too many builds out there that just completely negate Ronan.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well because I've got a player in my Discord server and they come from a fighting game background, video game background. And I talked a little bit about that myself, my own interests on the podcast before. And they've said they consider villains that you can build to counter, that have effectively counter picks, whether it's heroes or deck building cards, to be weaker because you can find ways to beat them easier. And I mean, that makes sense. But I have also seen people, just generally in the community and things, say, oh, of course he won there because he did it this way, but most decks wouldn't do that. And I almost feel like you need two separate lists, a sort of build against difficulty or an average deck taken against difficulty. I almost feel like they're hard to combine, and I feel like they both have valid arguments and perspectives.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never actually thought too much about that. I feel like in the back of my mind, I did not take in like deck teching. So like I thought Ultron was like right after like Magneto and Loki, and I think that he's one of the more difficult villains. And I never counted being able to deck tech against him, like making him like an easier villain. But I think that's definitely something that I might need to reevaluate because I think that's a really interesting point. Like if you can add in a few cards that will make the villain like way easier, maybe it is an easier villain. Like not like super duper easy, but like they should drop a few points or something. Yeah, that's super interesting.
I think it is kind of we're dividing up into two groups, and it's basically how do you approach the game? Do you approach the game from I want to build this deck and then try it out? I would say that's like, a hero sided like view of the game, or I'm going to play Ultron. Let's build a deck to beat Ultron, or let's build a deck to beat Ronan, rather than I'm going to build a Spider-Man deck and I'm going to go play the deck. And so I think both sides are very, very valid, but it does change kind of the conversation of what creates a difficult villain based on what side or how you approach the game.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to jump to a specific question we received for this episode, and I'm gonna mess up the pronunciation here, so I don't know if it's from Takfrio, but the question says, in Web Warrior Fanatic's villain tier list, there are just 2 S-tier villains, Ronan and Venom Goblin. Do you think that we need more S-tier villains at this stage of game development, or do you prefer to just have those 2 S-tier villains as an ultimate challenge in the game? So I'm going to throw that one to Web Warrior first, as his tier list is named in it. But do you think we need more villains kind of at the Ronan and Venom Goblin level, or are you happy with what we have?
I just want to say shout outs to Takio. I always pronounce it taco when we're talking,
I do
but
too.
I think I just ignored yeah, so but yeah,
The
shout
3
out
is silent.
so for the question, I actually I talked about it before the Age of Apocalypse. I actually really wanted another S tier villain, and I actually wanted a villain that's like I wanted Apocalypse to like usurp Ronin and Venom Goblin. I wanted like someone to like take that spot, like, and maybe he wouldn't be as replayable, but I think that it's really cool for the game to expand like the difficulty and the like easiness, and not just always be so streamlined like in the middle. I do feel like the last few boxes, all the villains have kind of been like in the middle of the pack. And definitely some of the ones were like I think that Apocalypse One is definitely like near the higher end of that. But I do like it whenever the toughest thing is kind of pushed a little bit. So I really want like one more villain at least. Like, come on, give us 3. I don't know.
How do you feel about that, Nelson?
So I think it's interesting. I like Venom Goblin more than I like Ronan. I think Venom Goblin and Ronan are about the same level of difficulty, but I think the way that Venom Goblin is created difficult, or the reason that he is difficult, is interesting and fun, whereas Ronan's difficult because he surges and because he's annoying and all of this. And so I think if we can strike a balance where we get more things on the level of Magneto, where it doesn't feel like it's crazy difficult just because they overrun you with encounter cards. And I feel like, that's an S tier villain. And since we have Ronan already in the game, being that villain, in order to make it as difficult as Ronan, I almost think that it gets to be more unfair. And so I'm okay with having Ronan at the top. And I would prefer more villains alongside the difficulty level of like Magneto, which feel very challenging, very fair, but I don't necessarily ever want something to usurp Ronan. That being said, if they can do that with still making it feel fair and not just like I surged 4 times and that's why I lost, I'm here for it. But I'm kind of thinking that we're at a point in the game's development where I don't think Ronan's going to ever be usurped as the most challenging villain.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm probably more even on the extreme. If I have like Web Warrior Fanatic at the top wanting Apocalypse to be this monster, and Nelson's like maybe we could have another Magneto instead or something. I kind of like them a little bit lower, but I like modular ways to make them more difficult. So I've really been liking these setup modulars that add on like plus stats and retaliate and things that way. I also think I typically prefer what I call attrition villains. So villains which are going to put a lot out, but I can deal with it, as opposed to ones that are going to blow me away because this one encounter card came up and now I've lost. But some people like kind of the thrill of that and the randomness and the kind of danger. So there's a lot of interesting arguments. So I guess we all have slightly different opinion there, maybe.
Yeah, I think one like solution that I forgot who, but someone was commenting on it. Someone said that maybe it can be like the Apocalypse One, like in the Age of Apocalypse, where there can be like the regular like standard, and then maybe something from the jump standard to expert makes the villain a lot more difficult, and even potentially having like an extreme mode, like Apocalypse having a stage 4, like maybe having another stage for people that want to have like a more difficult than run challenge, but then still have like that regular expert mode, like stage 3 or something, for for everyone else that doesn't want to like kill themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like there could be things to do that. Personally, I still haven't fiddled with modular sets yet. I haven't gone through all the heroes, so because of that, I haven't really fiddled around with other stuff. I think that definitely it adds so much variability. Like if you take out modular sets to make them easier and add them in, and just like we were saying with that Thanos challenge, like I really like that Thanos challenge because it actually feels like I feel like Thanos should have retaliate like innate, and then possibly retaliate too when he has his helmet. And he should have like overkill permanently. Like it just feels like right for Thanos. And I was thinking that Ronan, I don't know too much about like him in the comics, but like in the MCU, like he's not, he's not like that guy. And it feels weird that he's that guy in this game. So like I think Apocalypse could be that guy, or like, someone else should be that guy than Ronan. But from this game, I associate Ronan as like this like super tough guy. And I'm like, man, but it's just Ronan the Accuser. He's not supposed to be that level.
He's a minion. Come on.
That's really good points, honestly. I really like that. And I'm starting to wonder if this Thanos challenge I've concocted was not hard enough for Web Warrior Fanatic.
No, I think it's, oh man, I don't think, I have some doubts whether or not we'll be able to take it on.
We can absolutely set up the game.
Yeah, we could do that.
So I guess like it kind of boils down to like, is there such thing as too difficult in your mind? Because like we were kind of differing on our opinions of if we want more difficult villains, and so I'm going to pose it to Web Warrior first. Is there a villain that you would consider too difficult in this game?
Like I don't think that there's any villain that's too difficult, just because I feel like it's good to have like that range of villains, right? I think that if this game was missing like a Ronin, I don't know if I would enjoy it as much. I'd be like, Venom Goblin's fair. There's no unfair villain. Like, where's like that super annoying like unfair villain or something? I will say that like the stuff with Nebula, where it's like with her where she's surging and everything. I never thought about what villain there was talking about with taunt and making her attack you so you can get rid of more attachments. And that's stuff like that is what makes me like really love this game. Like I'm not sure how if that strategy like worked, but if that's like the way to beat Nebula, if she like gets like on a Surge Fest, like that means that Nebula should not even be that hard. Like you just had figured that out. Like we have to talk to villain theory, figure out that you need to put in like them to make her attack you, and you can get rid of more attachments like during a player phase or something. And I like stuff like that's what makes me really enjoy the game. So personally, the way that it is right now, I think that Ronin, you had to like think about stuff like that. And a lot of stuff is like from other content creators on YouTube that I've seen. I'm like, okay, like that's a really cool like way or strategy to go against Ronin. So I do feel like that every villain in the game right now has a formula to them, or they like have some sort of way where they are defeatable. So I personally don't think that any current villains are like that level. I would have said Nebula like if you get unlucky, but now I'm thinking about with the taunt thing, like maybe you can actually get rid of it.
There's always a way.
Yeah. So you're telling me there's a chance. What about you, villain? Is Ronan, Venom Goblin, are they too difficult?
I would say I don't like that their base difficulty is so high, but I think being able to use modular sets to make them that difficult or even go beyond is a good thing to have, because I agree with Web Warrior Fanatic. It's really good to have like those levels of difficulty available in the game. So I'm kind of on the fence. I kind of wish they were baseline a little bit lower. What if Ronan's Kree command ship was an optional kind of thing? That was his special hard mode, and you didn't have to always have that kind of thing. Something like that. So I think I kind of agree, but I'm kind of in the middle as well on that front.
Yeah, I think I would agree a little bit more with villain. I love the fact that we can modulate this game and we can make it as difficult, or maybe not as easy, but easier based on what we put into the villain deck. And I like the base level villain difficulty being a little bit lower than Ronan. However, that being said, I do like the fact that we have Ronan in this game, because if we didn't have Ronan, it would be another villain that the designer team had concocted, and we were like, oh shoot, like now we have this thing to deal with. And so like I feel like we've seen it throughout the game's history where the design team learns from their previous designs and tweaks and modifies and changes and all of that. And so I think having that capstone that like, oh my gosh, this is brutal, is great for the players like Web Warrior Fanatic who want to just take them down and all of that. But I also like the fact that we've seen Apocalypse 2 or whatever some of these more difficult villains are. They're not as difficult, but you can modulate them now with like Flight and all of these other modular sets to make them even more challenging. And so I like the fact that we have Ronan, but I don't necessarily think that he is he's too difficult, I think, in my opinion. Yeah. That all boils down to, he's too difficult.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting topic, and I actually want to bounce back to something that Web Warrior Fanatic said before, because he says, he's not changed up the mod sets very much. There's heroes he hasn't played yet, and I'm kind of jealous there's that level of discovery left for him, because I would love to, replay that experience, because I hope one day you do mess around a bit more with those modular sets, because I absolutely love what you can do with those. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I'm sorry that like I feel so happy about the game that there's like so many heroes I haven't played, and I'm taking it pretty slow with it too. I played all the villains at this point, and a lot of people want me to play certain heroes, and I'm getting there, but I like that I'm still exploring this game, and it's so much fun. Sorry to like really rub it in, but yeah. I definitely want to experiment with the modular sets after I get through all the heroes, and I kind of have like a baseline of what I feel about each hero. But yeah, I definitely want to get through the modular sets, and I think playing stuff like with Thanos, with that thing you're talking about, that's gonna be a good experience. My play group, they're more into filling with modular sets, and they watch both of y'all's stuff, and they've often like filled around. So like I'll just like show up, and they'll have like some villain with like random modular set stuff, and we face that in multiplayer, and it's been fun. And I don't even know or remember like the name of those sets, but they specifically pick stuff that's like like if it's like something like the Space Stone with Thanos, like something like super annoying, or like something that like synergizes with that thing. So I think it definitely enhances the game a lot for sure.
Awesome, very cool. We've talked quite a bit about individual villains, but we've got a question here from the amazingly named Nocturnal Duck. And they specifically asked this question at Nelson, but they say, what's the most difficult multi-villain scenario to play against? And I think we can all chip in on this, maybe afterwards.
Okay. Most difficult multi-villain scenario to play against.
I'm going to interrupt this actually. What do you guys consider a multi-villain scenario? Because you've got scenarios like Wrecking Crew and Four Horsemen and Tower Defense where there are multiple villains on the board at once. But then you've got scenarios like Morlock Siege and Mansion Attack where there are multiple villains but they're in a stack together, so there aren't multiple out on the table at once. Because I think there's quite a distinction there.
Mm-hmm. I consider a multi-villain scenario any scenario where you can have two or more villains on the table at the same time. So like Sinister Assault or the Sinister Six or whichever one that is. Yeah. you can have one villain on the table, but there is the option of having more than one. So I would consider that a multi-villain scenario, but I'm curious what Web Warrior says.
Yeah, I think personally I would have considered it like what you're saying with a Morlock Siege, or On the Run, or even Mansion Attack. Yeah, like I would have considered all those also multiple scenarios, but maybe I need to reevaluate that, because I don't think I thought that through, because I guess there's technically only one villain out. So it would actually be the same thing. It could just be like the stage 2 or stage 3 of that villain, but like with a different, like unique name or whatever. Yeah, actually, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think if we are considering those multi-villain scenarios, I don't know if they usurp any of the where you can have multiple villains on the table in terms of difficulty. I don't necessarily think Mansion Attack, On the Run, more like Siege are more difficult. I think honestly I may go Four Horsemen here. I think Four Horsemen's pretty mean in terms of multi-villain scenarios. But I will say I think multi-villain scenarios are easier to solve than a lot of the single version scenarios. And maybe that's just because we haven't seen as many of them. We have like 6, 7 of them. But I think Four Horsemen, you can have some brutal encounter cards there.
Cool, yeah. I think I would go with Four Horsemen as well. I think most of the other ones fall into the sort of lower, sort of couple of, if we have a tier list, and maybe in the lower tiers down overall. I do think the kind of conversation was interesting with what is a multi-villain and what isn't. I almost feel like we maybe need to use, as a community, I'm just going out there, maybe multi-villain is kind of an umbrella term, and then the ones where multiple villains are on the table at once, and then the ones where they kind of just change and cycle. Maybe they need like a different name, or they're kind of like subcategories of the bigger category, because they all do ask you to deal with different villains, but some ask you to deal with multiple villains at once, which is kind of an important distinction, I would say.
Yeah. To the question of the most difficult multi-villain, I'm not sure. I think that Four Horsemen probably is the most difficult, I think, base villain. But like Nelson was saying, and you too, about Sinister Six on expert. I don't know. I would have said before I heard you guys, say everything. I was gonna say I think Sinister Six is the hardest on expert, but definitely non-standard. And just because like a lot of those cards are just so weird. It's just like okay, it's like the life size equal is just regular, and it's like by the way, on expert mode, this card has toughness.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've not personally found the Sinister Six too difficult, but they do have their moments. I think some of those cards you reference are from the Guerrilla Warfare modular set, and there's this little special side scheme in there, which is every enemy out on the board gets a hazard icon, and extra encounter card you take. So they have the potential for things to go very, very wrong, and I've had that happen at least once before, which was not a fun experience. So it's interesting how there's all these different levels and experiences people can have, which is another thing about this game I love, that it's a little bit different for everyone. So that's really cool. I actually really enjoyed talking about those different multiple villains.
No, and I think that this bridges to the next couple of questions, and we're going to kind of combine a couple of questions here from Stephen Ball, Anthony, and Wiz Rad. But basically, the next talking point is the difficulty jump between standard and expert. And so we kind of talked about it, but what villains increase the most in difficulty when going from standard to expert mode? Web Warrior was talking about some of the cards in the Sinister Six encounter where in expert mode it gains toughness. In expert mode, this card can't be canceled, that kind of stuff. But I think that there are, the fact that you go from stage 2 to 3 as your final stage in some of those villains, that can be pretty brutal in some of these. But let's go to villain. What would you think is the biggest jump in difficulty from standard to expert?
The biggest jump, I wasn't prepared for the one biggest jump, but I was just thinking about the Mojo Mania scenarios with like Magog, Mojo. I think Magog is a huge, huge jump between standard and expert. I almost feel like, because he wins through getting a set amount of counters on the environment, I almost feel like his counter generation is doubled on expert. Instead of getting 1 when someone's damaged, it's 2. And that is a huge, huge jump. So off the top of my head, that is the one I'm going to throw out there.
What about you, Web Warrior?
For me, I would definitely say Venom Goblin. I think that, Venom Goblin, we all agree that he's like an S tier villain. And then you start the game with 2 face-down encounter cards. But then if you're playing him on standard, you can just start off with nothing, and then you can just build your board.
That's interesting.
I'll my vote.
I kind of feel like he is kind of hard on standard, but I say this having basically only played him on standard once or twice across a long, long time. So I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's a really good point. I think a lot of listeners will agree with that. Those encounter cards you start with are devastating. Nelson might remember this. There's a little anecdote I'm going to throw out there. We were testing Deadpool like individually, but we were talking about it. This wasn't on stream or content or anything. And Nelson's like, "Oh, I just destroyed Venom Goblin with like an all basic Deadpool deck. Do you remember that, Nelson?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to try that immediately. Yeah, that sounds fun." The setup of encounter cards I got, I don't remember the exact order, but it was something like Advanced Glider, Under Fire, like Villain Activates. I just walked away from the table. I didn't try it.
And we're gonna put away Marvel Champions for a week.
I don't even know like how that would have gone with Deadpool surviving and flipping, and I just like, nope, I'm done with this. I walk away. So that initial opening it's a huge jump.
Yeah, just getting 3 encounter cards on turn 1. It kind of goes back to higher variance. And the other name that I would throw out here is Nebula, right? Because Nebula Standard is not nearly as hard as Nebula Expert, because you're starting with some of those techniques. You're not being able to get rid of them. In Standard, you can get rid of all of them. You're like, okay, cool. And then I think it's on the printed Nebula card where, they start gaining Surge. Everyone gains Surge in like stage 3 and stuff like that. And so I think Nebula gets a little crazy. Mutagen formula also kind of with that dealing out encounter cards, although I don't think that the encounter cards in Mutagen formula are as detrimental as that in Venom Goblin. But yeah, there are some steps up in difficulty. And we have kind of a question that I want to bridge over to from this conversation. And so it's from Daring Lime. I want to hear your thoughts on Mysterio. And so they were saying that they didn't really like them, but they replayed him on Expert and they've become his favorite villain. He just kind of is oppressive. But I also want to kind of talk about this because I think Mysterio is one of the interesting ones in Expert because he's the only one that has a future stage with lower hit points than that of the previous stage. So I think in stage 2 is like 16 hit points, and stage 3 is 15 hit points per player. But what do you think about Mysterio? Because I do think that he has a pretty significant ramp from standard to expert.
Yeah, Mysterio's a really, really interesting villain. And shout outs to Daring Lime. I think he's an upcoming content creator. I think Webro Fanatic, you played with him recently. Is that correct?
Yeah. Shout out to Darren Lime.
Mysterio is a weird villain because sometimes I feel like on expert still, I absolutely annihilate him. Maybe it's a bit of the Nebula effect, right? Sometimes, yeah, he'll shuffle a couple of cards in my deck, but it'll be like, oh, add 1 threat to the main scheme, take 1 damage. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. Leave me alone. And then other times, he might have somehow, for encounter cards and things, snuck Shadow of the Past into your deck or something like that. Or there are ways for normal encounter cards, not just the kind of slightly weaker illusion cards, to get into your deck. And that's where things can go kind of crazy. So I think he's quite high variance. And I don't quite remember quite how he plays out on standard. But I could definitely see that jumping up. Although, again, a great point. His final stage is weaker. A bit like Ultron. Maybe those are the only 2. I don't know if that's true. But he has lower health in his final stage. So I don't really know how to place him. Webware Fanatic, do you have any thoughts about Mysterio?
I don't remember his final stage effect. I remember the effect ramps up a little bit. Like I think it's instead of like maybe shuffling deck, maybe put it on top of your deck, like his encounter cards. I'm not exactly sure. Do you guys remember his stage 3 effect?
Yeah, those illusion cards go to the top of your deck on stage 3.
Okay, yeah, so I feel like it's a little bit worse, but then I'm not sure why his hit points dropped. Do you guys know like what the concept for that was supposed to be?
They've said, I believe on a podcast somewhere or something, I'm not entirely sure, but I know I've heard it was intentional and they just decided that was how they were going to do it.
Okay, I like it.
I honestly thought you were about to say they said that it was a mistake and they meant to put like a little bit more on it.
I think that's what people ask. Like, is he meant to have less health? Was this a misprint? And like, oh, that's intentional.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I think for Mysterio, yeah, I mean, I play games against him where like I have like 7 encounter cards on a table, and I'm like, I think I was like recording it too, so I was like, oh, this looks really bad. Like, I wonder what's gonna happen, and then like I flip all of them, and it's like, oh wait, I'm fine. I just feel like a lot of his counter cards, like what you were saying, Villain Theory, is that they just some of them aren't as impactful, right? Like it's just like a little bit here and there.
Yeah, the variance is interesting. I hope in the future we get some different mod sets because I love to change them up with the illusion keyword traits
that'd
in
be
it,
cool.
and then we can put those into Mysterio and get some different effects in. So that'd be really fun.
That would be cool.
Something else I really want to mention about Mysterio, actually, because I actually really like Mysterio. At one point on Nelson's Discord server, there was a challenge involving Mysterio, and I do not remember the entire details of the challenge, but I remember I wanted to break it. So I went for Star-Lord, so I ended up with 1 million encounter cards in front of me, and I was just sliding shots for like a bazillion damage, and glorious.
Amazing. I love that. So speaking of the, a new modular set that would include illusion cards, something like that, I guess, Web Warrior, you have stated that you don't like to mess with the modular sets. Villain, you've stated that you do like to mess with the modular sets. I guess, like, we had a question from Juan. Do you prefer to play with the recommended modular sets or others? And so what I want to do here is I want to change this because we've kind of already talked about this. Villain, what would you say to convince Web Warrior Fanatic or the listeners to try and switch up some of these mod sets and some of these villains?
I have the perfect answer because it's something I wanted to mention before and I just completely forgot.
Perfect.
So a lot of villains, if I were to rank them in difficulty order and then like take out the mod sets, not a lot of them would change, but some of them would. And one that I think gets significantly harder is mutagen formula. So it's Green Goblin, it's spider themed. I'm appealing to Web Warrior Fanatics, Web Warrior side here. If you like difficult villains, the recommended mod set in mutagen formula is Goblin Gimmicks, which is actually, in my opinion, an incredibly easy modular. It's very easy. I think most of those encounter cards, when I see one come up, I'm like, oh, I've got a breather here. It's not too bad. It's maybe half an encounter card compared to some of the more difficult sets. So if you change up his modular set for something more difficult, he jumps significantly in difficult because he goes from having maybe like, I don't know, let's just say average encounter cards and then a bunch of easy ones to average encounter cards and a bunch of difficult ones. And I think it sways his difficulty so much, especially that turn 1 on expert, or when you flip him on, standard or expert, and you get a lot of those encounter cards in. Now all of them are kind of heavy hitters. And if you like challenge, I think that's one where you can really feel the difference. And because he has those big bursts of encounter cards, you're almost guaranteed to have something come up and make a difference in the game.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I actually really like the Green Goblin. Like that's the first video that I posted on YouTube because I was like, this is so cool, like Spider-Man versus Green Goblin. So you definitely got me with that appeal. And I think I might have to try him out because I've never tried him other than with Goblin gimmicks. And like you said, that is one of the easier modular sets, especially when you get like a pumpkin bomb. It's just like, okay, he gets an attachment, and my encounter phase is done. I can just do whatever I want. That's super interesting. Yeah, I never thought about him with other module sets. Yeah, he could definitely ramp up.
I'm gonna put down
villain. Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say, so villain, what would you recommend Web Warrior Fanatic take on?
I think one of the classic ones is to put in Goblin Gear from Venom Goblin because it's got the exact theme. But I might change it up slightly. I might say let's go for a Spidey villain showdown and put in the Sinister Assault modular set, which has the Dark Arc and all sorts of things. It's not recommended in any sets, it's from the campaign, but you can use it as a regular modular set. So now, in addition to all the goblins, you're going to get these big, sort of big name villains coming out and jumping out at you as well for a super minion showdown.
And might I add, 18 more boost icons. But anyways, yeah, that is fun. I think anything that you can modulate that scenario specifically with more challenging minions. Same thing with Claw, with like the setup, discard cards until you get a minion. You can ramp some of those difficulties up, and we've gotten 5, 6, 7 years of content. Jeez, oh my gosh, this game's been out for a while now. And we have those levers to pull at this point. But I think Sinister Assault. I love that suggestion for mutagen formula. That's fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I might have to try that out, or maybe we can try that. I don't know. Yeah, that sounds really fun, and it's like really thematic too with all the advanced glider. I mean, that is terrible, but I think the other ones in that set aren't the worst thing. It's really just that advanced glider, and then if he gets activation afterwards, which does combo really well with his with Musion formula because he's doing multiple encounter cards. So yeah, that could be nasty.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited for you to try that. I love changing modular sets. I do actually really like some of the original modular sets because they're quite thematic normally and they're usually quite well balanced and chosen for those scenarios. But I played them a lot, so yeah, that's gonna be fun to see if you change that up.
So another question that we got about these modular sets is from Cardboard Callan. And Villain, when you are choosing modular sets to shake up the game, right? Are you looking to change the difficulty of villains? Are you looking to kind of change up the experience of that scenario? And if it is changing the scenario, are you trying to, or if you are trying to change the difficulty, are you trying to make it more difficult or make it easier?
That's a great question. This is like perfect. I just love the mod sets. I would say sometimes it's just one, sometimes it's both. Probably mostly it's both because we have so many mod sets now. I'm actually working on a video, but I think there's like 96 different mod sets now if you have all the content. And there's usually something in the difficulty you want that can change up the experience as well. So I would say, normally for me, I want to increase the difficulty. There are so many super fun scenarios in Marvel Champions, but the state of the deck building pool and my experience in the game, I go into most scenarios kind of knowing I've won unless I try to spice it up somehow. There are exceptions. Ronan Venom Goblin maybe a little bit more, take a bit more care, shall we say. But a lot of villains, I like to make them more difficult. But I do like to change experience as well. One of my favorite is Taskmaster, because he punishes you for changing forms. So I like to put in the modular sets that force you to go Alter Ego, because it's kind of more difficult in general. But now you've got to flip back down, and Taskmaster's going to punish you again for flipping down.
That's awesome. Okay. So to kind of finish up the conversation around villains, as well as around kind of increasing or changing the difficulty via mod sets, we have a question from Dan the Crow. Which mod sets increase the difficulty the most for some of your favorite villains? And we talked about this a little bit with Mutagen or Web Warrior Fanatic, but D20, do you have an answer for this one?
I don't know if D20's here.
Jeez. But Villain, do you have a answer for this one? This is what happens when you make me record at 9 a.m.
I didn't make you. I put 2 times out. Let it be known, audience. I might leave this in. I don't know if there's a specific mod set I have in mind, but I've sort of said this a little bit before. My favorite mod sets are the ones with these setup and permanent keywords, or even just a setup keyword to change things from turn one. I consider Flight, Super Strength, and Telepathy almost expert and a half in a way. You know, if you give your villain a bigger stats and a nasty keyword for the entire fight, it's not like you're getting a dramatic amount more tempo from them, but there is a bit more to do. The numbers are just against you slightly more. So I absolutely love throwing those in. My partner hates it, but I'll be like, maybe Ultron needs the flight modular or something like that. And my favorite thing is, though, if they can fly, just throw that in there. I've done both flight and super strength separately, I will add, actually for mutagen formula Web Warrior Fanatic, because they think they both make sense for Green Goblin. So that's another suggestions out there. So I would say those ones.
Yeah, for I was gonna say, yeah, I feel like Villander really likes those the setup ones that come like straight in, because you know he recommended the Thanos ones, but I think that those probably do have the most impact because you can add in a module that if it's like 5 or 6 cards, you may not ever see them. But if you like add in like flight, like particularly like with overkill, like you really feel that impact of that module set impacting that scenario. And I actually forget everything that I just said. I actually did play a game with the module set, and I completely forgot about it. It's Venom Goblin with the Infinity Gauntlet, and I have that
Ooh.
like on the channel. I completely forgot that I did that because I wanted to test like a deck that I thought was like really powerful against it. I think I just got really lucky because I don't think the Gauntlet impacted that much on the board, and I think that that's a pretty fun module set too. That comes up like right away, but like what Evan there was talking about the because you have the Infinity Gauntlet on that enemy.
Yeah, I actually remember seeing the video you did now. You were playing Spider-Man Peter Parker, right?
The GOAT.
Valkyrie? Wait, no, wrong person. Nelson, do you
Each
have
one he
any?
is here.
Oh, Nelson, did you have any mod sets that like you have like as a favorite to increase any villains, or do you just like just change it up or ask chat?
I do really like asking chat. I really like changing it up and increasing. But if I had to pick one, I always gravitate back to the Mojo Mania mod sets, everything that comes out of there. And I don't know if it makes it more challenging, but I do love the fantasy modular set. I like, the game of Mojos, getting that +1 hand size, adding an amplify. I like Dragon. I like Fetch Quest. I just think that that's a fun one. So I typically throw that in. It doesn't really, I think that's a relatively easy modular set, but it's just a fun modular set. I think, and maybe this is a discussion for another time, but just modular sets in general and how you can shake them up. I know, Villain, you're working on the video. I have not seen that yet, but I'm looking forward to it. But anything that like leans into a strength. So like think Zola, who really, really likes minions and stuff. If you throw a minion heavy modular set into those, then you're going to like increase the difficulty. Throw Wrecking Crew or Sinister Assault into Zola. You're gonna have a tough time, and you can very much modulate the difficulty with strategic choices in modular set, especially if you lean into what that villain is trying to do, or lean away from what the villain is trying to do in terms of taking out all the minions when you have the Infinity Stone.
Sounds fun. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with the modulars. I've really enjoyed this villain discussion. I feel like villains don't get discussed enough. I know in the previous episode we discussed the new ones because we're discussing the new box, but just in general and like in a general sense, I think this has been really, really fun. I've really enjoyed it. Now, this is the part of the podcast where we say what's coming up next. And you know what? I don't even know if we shouted out Web Warriors YouTube channel, but we all have YouTube channels. I think Nelson streams on Twitch. I don't think you regularly do Web Warrior Fanatic, but feel free to correct me. So what are you guys doing next, either on your channels or playing at home in general? Let's start with Nelson.
Yeah, so I am playing just kind of the normal stuff, going through and playing Arkham, Marvel, and Lord of the Rings. I just got Sky Tier Horde, which is kind of a card tower defense battling system type thing. So I'm really excited. I'm learning the rules, and I should have that video up, or that stream coming up on the channel pretty soon. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm just on YouTube. I don't do any streams or anything, but I started playing some live games like through collabs, like with D20 Woodworking and Daring Lime, and that's been a lot of fun. This past week, I've been getting into Lorcana. I don't know if you guys know about that game. So the TCG bug is kind of getting me right now. And I mean, I think so. Mario Jam is still like my favorite game and the best game, but we don't have foil cards and we don't have booster. And I just, oh man. And one of my friends got a booster box. So it's like a bunch of like, I think it's like 24 or something like that, booster packs in it. And then we opened all of them. And
Nice.
there's like no enchanted cards. And I'm like, I cannot buy booster packs because I'm gonna get nut. Like I don't wanna, but I just love opening them. Like it's like the funnest thing. So but yeah, that's the only thing that Mario Champions, which I think is a good thing because I think it's pretty addictive and bad for your wallet. But yeah, that's what I'm kind of getting into. Oh man, boosters.
You guys can't see it, but Nelson's just got like almost like kind of a fan of dollar notes, but instead it's booster packs. He's got booster packs everywhere. He's just like, I'm fortunate enough to say no TCG has quite got their claws in me yet, but they're so tempting. It looks so fun.
Dude, Unlimited is amazing. You should try it.
I know. I kind of regret not getting in like at the beginning. I don't know.
Set 2's coming. It's a great time to jump in.
Stop. Speaking about my channel, what's coming up and stuff, I'm just playing away with Marvel Champions. I really love the latest expansion. I'm still playing a lot of the stuff and villains from that. I actually played a ton of the harder villains like Ronan and Venom Goblin for this podcast, and I'm quite glad to take a bit of a break from them and go back to the other stuff for a little bit. Though they were fun, honestly. It's amazing how with the new, expanded cardboard, they're definitely not as bad as I remember, having played them a lot now again. But coming up on my channel, let's see. I'm starting something what I'm calling villain season. So this video is kind of coincidentally landed there. Maybe even inspired it subconsciously. But I want to talk about villains and mod sets and analyze them a lot more. So this kind of worked out quite well. I'd love to have maybe Nelson and WebWarrior talk maybe a little bit more about maybe their favorite villain on some of that. So we'll see what comes up. And I think my next video, probably after this, if nothing goes wrong, is I want to do a video about pairing up the heroes in multiplayer. So I think that will be cool.
Nice. I have a whiteboard with all my ideas on different videos that I want to do, and one of them is my top 5 like two-handed pair ups. So let me know when that's coming out because I want to time it because I think that would be kind of fun to shout each other out at that point.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And I think that about does it for this episode. So I want to say a huge thank you to WebWarrior Fanatic for joining us here.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is super fun. And yeah, the conversation just really flowed. Really enjoyed it.
It was great to have you on.
Coming up on the next episode, we are probably talking about the aggression aspect, and I say probably because we've got some special kind of stuff cooking. Maybe it'll come up instead, maybe not, but it's probably the aggression aspect as we start to talk about all the different aspects in detail across the next few months, which I think will be really fun. If you have questions you want to hear about the aggression aspect, let us know. You can email us at shadowofthecast@gmail.com. But most of the questions, I think all of the questions today, come from our YouTube community post that I put up from my channel. You can comment there, put your question, we will 100% read it, and there's a very, very high chance we will ask it. So thank you to everyone who submitted this time, and please keep an eye out for that.
Excellent. So again, thank you, WebWarrior Fanatic, for joining. All of your information is going to be in the show description or the video description if you're watching on YouTube. But until next time, I guess we may have a draft coming up. We'll see.
Oh, the draft will be fun. That'll be on Nelson's channel.
Yeah. But thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you guys so much.